He signed the papers without looking at her once. That was the part that broke something in Celine Ashcroft. Not the words, not the lawyers, not even the cold silence that had replaced what used to be a marriage. It was the fact that Adrian Mercer, the man she had given 3 years of her life to, couldn't be bothered to look up from his phone long enough to watch her sign away everything she'd tried to build with him. She pressed the pen to paper. Her hand didn't shake. She made sure of that. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Mercer Tower's 42nd floor, the California coast glittered like it always did. Indifferent, gorgeous, unbothered by human wreckage. Celine set the pen down. She picked up the single suitcase she'd been allowed to bring, and she walked out. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said goodbye. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by someone who was supposed to love you, this story is for you. Stay with us until the very end, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about silence, power, and who gets the last word. If this story moves you, please hit the like button and drop a comment below telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The elevator doors closed behind her and Celine exhaled, one long, controlled breath that she'd been holding for approximately 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She didn't count. She just knew. The lobby of Mercer Tower was all marble and money, the kind of place where the air itself seemed to communicate that certain people belonged and certain people were passing through. For 3 years, Celine had walked through this lobby as Adrian Mercer's wife. The security guards had nodded at her. The receptionists had smiled the careful smiles of people who weren't sure if she had any real authority, but weren't willing to risk finding out. Today, they didn't look at her at all. She pushed through the revolving glass door and stepped into the salt-edged Pacific air. The marina was 2 blocks south. She'd always liked walking to the water when her chest felt too tight to think straight. Old habit. One she'd picked up in a life so different from this one that it sometimes felt like it belonged to another person entirely. It did, in a way. She was halfway down the embankment steps when she heard the first helicopter. She didn't think much of it. Helicopters weren't unusual along this stretch of coast. The wealthy had been using them like taxis for a decade. But then a second one appeared, and then a third, and they weren't passing through. They were circling, low and deliberate, like birds of prey that had already spotted what they wanted. Celine stopped walking. The marina below her had gone very still. That was the thing that registered first, not the helicopters, not the distant sound of powerful engines cutting through water, but the stillness. 30, maybe 40 people who'd been moving around the docks a moment ago had all stopped. Every one of them was looking at something out beyond the harbor mouth. She followed their gaze. It came through the fog slowly, the way catastrophic things often do. Not all at once, but in pieces, each piece larger than the last. First a silhouette, black and massive, sliding through the white coastal haze, with the patient certainty of something that had never once been told it couldn't go somewhere. Then the full shape of it materialized, a superyacht so large it made the surrounding vessels look like toys left in a bathtub. 400 feet of matte black hull, moving through the water like a building that had learned to swim. No name on the side, no registry markings she could read from here. Just black. The harbor master was already on his radio, his voice carrying up to where she stood. Something about unauthorized entry, something about contacting the Coast Guard. 2 armed men in tailored dark suits were stepping off the first tender boat before it had fully docked, moving through the marina with the focused efficiency of people who had done this exact thing in a dozen different ports and never once been slowed down. They were securing the perimeter. Celine understood that term in a way most people didn't. She took 1 step backward. Then her foot caught the edge of the embankment step, and she grabbed the railing, steadying herself. And in that half-second of graceless stumbling, she looked down at the dock directly below her and made eye contact with one of the men in the dark suit. He stopped walking. He spoke into the earpiece at his collar, and then he looked back up at her and his entire face changed. Not with threat, not with aggression, but with something that looked, improbably, like relief. She took the stairs down without deciding to. Her legs moved. Her brain was still 3 seconds behind, still processing the yacht, the helicopters, the way this entire marina had been locked down in under 4 minutes with a precision that the Coast Guard itself couldn't have matched. The suited man met her at the base of the stairs. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, jaw like a geometry problem, a scar running through his left eyebrow that hadn't been there the last time she'd seen him. But she had seen him. She was almost certain she had seen him. "Ma'am," he said, "please don't be alarmed." "I'm not alarmed," she said, which was mostly true. He pressed his earpiece. "Confirmed visual. She's here." A pause. "Yes, sir." "Understood." The crowd that had gathered along the marina railing was filming on their phones, murmuring, one woman calling out that this was a movie shoot, someone else arguing that movie shoots don't lock down working marinas with armed men. A harbor master was trying to push past two of the suited security personnel and failing in the way that people fail when the thing they're pushing against has simply decided not to move. The suited man beside Celine said, "He's coming to you. He asked that you wait here." "Who is?" she said. The man didn't answer. He stepped to her left and slightly behind her, not blocking her path, but present in the way that bodyguards are present, close enough to matter, positioned to put himself between her and anything that came from the wrong direction. She almost said something. She almost told him she didn't need it. Instead, she watched the tender boat that was crossing from the yacht to the dock, and she counted the seconds between breaths the way she'd been taught to do when she was 11 years old, and everything around her was chaos, and the only thing she could control was whether or not she panicked. She did not panic. The man who stepped off the tender boat was 6'2" and broad through the shoulders, wearing a charcoal suit that had been made specifically for his body by someone who charged more for it than most people paid in rent. His hair was dark, cut short, and going silver at the temples in the way that happened to men who carried enormous weight for a very long time. His face was not handsome in any conventional sense. It was the face of a man who had survived things by being harder than whatever came at him. She knew that face. She'd been hoping for 27 years that she'd never see it again, because seeing it would mean something had gone very wrong with the life she'd so carefully constructed out of borrowed names and careful distances. Dante Viscari stopped in front of her. He was one of the most feared men in America. She knew that now in the way she hadn't fully understood as a child. The newspapers, the federal investigations that never quite stuck, the whispered name in rooms where real power changed hands. He ran the Eastern Seaboard's most sophisticated criminal organization with the precision of a CEO and the loyalty of a general, and the FBI had been trying to build a case against him for 11 years with precisely nothing to show for it. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. And then, in front of the assembled cameras and the gawking crowd and the open-mouthed harbor master and 37 strangers with their phones out, Dante Viscari bent his knee. He actually knelt, on the dock, in his bespoke suit. "Miss Ashcroft," he said, and his voice carried the particular quality of a man who was choosing every word with great care. "We have spent 7 years looking for you. Your family has been waiting." The crowd erupted. Celine did not. She looked down at him for exactly 4 seconds, she counted, and then she said very quietly, so that only he could hear, "Get up, Dante. You're going to get your suit dirty." His mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. He stood. 3 blocks north, in the 42nd floor conference room of Mercer Tower, Adrian Mercer's assistant knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for an answer, because whatever was on her face suggested waiting wasn't something she had time for. "You need to see this," she said, and held out her phone. Adrian was still at the table where the divorce had happened, papers in a neat stack in front of him, pen beside them, the particular stillness of a man who'd just finished something and wasn't sure how he felt about having finished it. He picked up the phone. He watched the video. The yacht. The security. The kneeling man. He read the caption. Read it again. Dante Viscari, Mafia boss, DOJ most wanted, just knelt in the middle of Carrington Marina for a woman. Some sources are identifying as Celine Mercer, née Ashcroft. Could this be the Ashcroft? More as this develops? Adrian set the phone down. He looked at the stack of divorce papers. He looked at the pen. "Get me Richard," he said. "He's already calling." "Get me Richard," he said again, quieter this time, which was somehow worse. His assistant left. Adrian walked to the window. Below him, 2 blocks south, he could see the tip of the marina from here. The crowd gathered along the railing, the black shape of something enormous sitting in the water beyond the harbor mouth. He pressed his palm flat against the glass and thought about the 3 years he'd just filed away in a stack of legal documents. Thought about every time he'd come home to a dark apartment and a quietly efficient woman who never complained, never argued back, never once demanded anything from him beyond the most basic acknowledgement that she existed. He'd called her ordinary. He'd said it out loud once, at a dinner with business partners, when she'd slipped away from the table to take a phone call and someone had asked how they met. "She's ordinary," he'd said, "but she's steady." He'd meant it as a compliment. He understood now, in the way that understanding comes too late to be useful, that he had said something profoundly stupid. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Victor Harlow. He picked up immediately. "Are you watching the news?" Adrian said. "I'm watching it," Victor said. His voice was perfectly level. It always was. "Don't do anything yet." "Don't do anything? Victor, that's Dante Vescari kneeling in front of my—" He stopped, corrected himself. "In front of Celine." "Ex-wife," Victor said. The word landed differently than it should have. "She's not—" Adrian started. "Adrian." Victor's voice carried the particular patience of a man who had been the smartest person in the room so many times it had ceased to excite him. "She signed the papers. You signed the papers. This changes nothing for you." Adrian looked at the marina below him. The crowd was growing. "Who is she?" he said. A pause. Long enough to be interesting. "I'll look into it," Victor said. "Stay put." He hung up. Adrian looked at the phone. Then he looked at the window. Then, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he thought about who his wife actually was, and realized that in 3 years of living with her, sleeping beside her, sharing meals and space, and the small bureaucratic details of a life in common, he had never thought to ask. He'd assumed ordinary. He'd stopped looking. On the tender boat crossing back to the yacht, Celine sat with her suitcase at her feet, and Dante across from her and 4 security personnel arranged at careful distances. The wind off the water was cold. She hadn't brought a coat. She hadn't planned for this when she'd packed last night, hadn't allowed herself to plan for it because planning for it would have meant believing it was real, and she'd spent 7 years becoming very good at not believing in things she couldn't afford to want. "Your mother's portrait is in the main salon," Dante said. "I thought you should know, in case—" He paused. "I thought you should know." Celine looked at the water. "How did you find me?" "Your account flagged 3 months ago. You used the original identity twice, once at a pharmacy, once at a federal building. We weren't the only ones watching, but we were faster." "Someone else was watching." "Yes." "How long?" "We think 18 months. Maybe more." She let that sit for a moment. The wind pulled at her hair. She didn't push it back. "The divorce," she said. "We don't know yet if it was coincidence." "You don't believe in coincidence?" "No," Dante said. "I don't." She looked at him then, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to on the dock. He was 51 now. She'd been 12 when she'd first understood what he was and what he did and what her father had asked of him. She'd spent years being angry about the oath her father had extracted from him, the blood oath that had made Dante Vescari her shadow, her unseen architecture, the presence she was never supposed to feel but always knew was somewhere in the dark at the edges of her life. She'd also spent years knowing that the oath was the reason she was still alive. "How was your father's closest friend?" Dante said, and she knew he meant Victor Harlow without her having to ask. "Before he was your husband's mentor." That's not a coincidence either. The superyacht rose ahead of them, massive and silent. Someone on the upper deck was moving. She could see the shape of a person against the railing, watching their approach. "Tell me everything," she said. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "There's a lot to tell," he said. "Then you'd better start." The tender bumped gently against the hull. Somewhere above them, a door opened. And Celine Ashcroft, who had spent 7 years making herself small enough to disappear, stood up from her seat, picked up her suitcase, and walked toward the ladder. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady through the signing and the lobby and the dock and the whole impossible afternoon. But there was a version of her that was 12 years old and hiding in a cargo hold, while her father's bodyguards bled out on the deck above her, and that version of her was shaking badly enough for both of them. She kept climbing. The main salon of the Ashcroft yacht was not what Celine had expected. She didn't know exactly what she had expected. Something cold, perhaps, the way power usually expressed itself in rooms like this. chrome and glass, and the kind of aggressive minimalism that announced its own price tag. But the salon was warm. Dark wood paneling, heavy curtains in deep burgundy, books that looked red rather than decorative. And above the fireplace, because there was an actual fireplace, on a yacht, which was the kind of extravagance that required a specific engineering solution she didn't want to think about right now, her mother's portrait. She stopped walking. Margaret Ashcroft had been 43 when that painting was commissioned. Celine knew that because she'd been there, 9 years old, sitting in the corner of the studio with a book she wasn't reading, watching her mother hold perfectly still for 3 hours and complain about it in a low, continuous murmur that the painter had chosen to find charming. In the portrait, her mother was looking slightly to the left of the viewer, the way she always looked at things she was about to make a decision about. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her expression was not happy, exactly. Resolved. Like a woman who had looked at everything the world had to offer her and decided to choose her own terms anyway. Celine had her mother's hands. She'd been told that so many times it had stopped meaning anything. Looking at the portrait now, in this room, on this boat, on this particular afternoon, it meant something again. She became aware of a sound behind her. Weight shifting, breath held, the specific quality of a room in which several people are trying to be invisible. She turned around. There were 6 of them arranged at the far end of the salon. 5 she didn't recognize. Men and women in business clothes, tablets and folders in hand. The assembled apparatus of an organization that had been preparing for this moment. The 6th was a woman of about 70, her white hair cut severely short, her back straight in a way that suggested it had been straight for 60 years and wasn't planning to change. She was wearing a charcoal suit and holding a glass of water she hadn't drunk from. The woman looked at Celine the way someone looks at a wound they've been carrying for a very long time. "You have your mother's posture," the woman said. "You have my father's lawyer," Celine said. "Hello, Constance." Constance Albright had been the Ashcroft family's chief legal counsel for 31 years. She'd been the one to structure the disappearance. New documents, new history, new name. She'd been the one to tell a 12-year-old Celine, in a voice stripped of everything except the facts, that her parents were dead, that certain people believed she was dead too, and that the only thing standing between her and the same outcome was whether she could stay believed dead long enough for the legal situation to resolve. The legal situation had taken 27 years to resolve. Celine thought that said something about the Ashcroft family's legal situation. "You look well," Constance said. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't. Not properly. Not since we confirmed the location." Constance set her water down. "There's a great deal to discuss." "Then let's discuss it." Dante appeared from somewhere to Celine's left. She hadn't heard him follow her in, which was both impressive and irritating. "You should eat something first." "I'm not hungry." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He looked back with the specific patience of a man who had learned that arguing with her was a losing proposition, but was willing to try anyway. "Fine," she said. "Talk and eat. Where do you want to start?" Constance opened the folder in her hands. "The estate," she said. "As of your parents' death, the Ashcroft Consortium passed into provisional holding under a trust structure your father established in 1987. The trust was designed to remain intact for up to 30 years, pending the establishment of a surviving heir." She paused. "You have 14 months. Before what?" "Before the trust dissolves and the assets are distributed to a list of secondary beneficiaries your father named as a contingency." "Who's on the list?" Constance looked at her over the edge of the folder. "That's where it becomes complicated." "Of course it does." 7 names. 5 of them are institutional. Foundations, educational endowments, 1 maritime conservation organization your father supported. The other 2 are individuals. Celine waited. "Victor Harlow," Constance said, "and a holding company called Meridian Pacific Group, which we believe to be beneficially owned by—" "Adrian," Celine said. The room went very quiet. Dante was looking at her with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite succeeding. "How long have you known?" she said. 3 weeks, Dante said. "We confirmed it 3 weeks ago." "And you didn't—" She stopped, pressed her back teeth together. "Let it go, because it wasn't the most important question. Tell me about Meridian Pacific." "Registered in Delaware 4 years ago. Shell structure. 4 layers deep before you get to anything with Adrian Mercer's name on it. The capitalization came from Victor Harlow's private equity fund. She set her fork down. She hadn't remembered picking it up. Victor funded a company in Adrian's name, she said slowly, and then that company appears as a secondary beneficiary of my family's trust. Yes. And Victor is also a personal beneficiary. Yes. So if I die unmarried within the next 14 months. Victor and Adrian split the Ashcroft Consortium's secondary distribution, which, with the current asset valuations, would be approximately, Constance checked her papers, $43 billion. Nobody spoke for a moment. Outside, through the yacht's panoramic windows, the California coast was sliding past. They'd moved, she realized, while she was looking at her mother's portrait. They were already out of the marina. The divorce, Celine said. Yes, Dante said. The divorce was the trigger. We believe so. An unmarried heir can be eliminated without complicating the trust structure. A married heir creates legal entanglement, questions of spousal inheritance, potential contests. Getting you divorced first was, he paused, choosing the word carefully, cleaner. She thought about Adrian at the table, the way he hadn't looked up, the way Victor Harlow had called him twice that week. She'd heard the name, hadn't thought much of it, had stopped thinking much of most things that happened in that apartment, because thinking about them too carefully tended to produce feelings she didn't have the infrastructure to manage. Does Adrian know? She said. We don't know? Best guess? Dante was quiet for a moment. No, I don't think he knows. Why not? Because if he knew, he's the kind of man who would have handled it differently. Adrian Mercer is many things. He's not patient enough for a 27-year conspiracy. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Victor is, she said. Victor Harlow has been playing a long game since before your father was killed. We think the assassination attempt 27 years ago. We think Victor was involved. The word assassination landed in the room with the particular weight of a thing that has been true for a long time without being spoken. Celine picked up her fork again, put food in her mouth, chewed, swallowed. She did this because she needed to do something with her hands, and because Dante had been right that she needed to eat, and she was not going to give him the satisfaction of showing how badly her chest hurt right now. My father trusted him, she said, when she was sure her voice would come out level. Your father trusted everyone he shouldn't have and no one he should. It was his defining flaw. That's a brutal thing to say about a dead man. He asked me to be brutal if it kept you alive. I'm honoring that request. She looked at him. He looked back. There was something behind his eyes that she'd never been able to read, not even when she was a child and had tried, with the aggressive curiosity of a kid who needed to know if the large, serious man her father had assigned to their household was someone to be afraid of. She'd decided then that he wasn't. Not to her. She still believed that. All right, she said. What do we do? Constance squared her papers. The succession ceremony. Your father included a formal mechanism. If a surviving heir presents themselves within the 30-year window and passes the consortium's internal verification process, the trust transfers immediately and completely. It supersedes the secondary distribution. Victor and Meridian Pacific get nothing. What's the verification process? Biometric, DNA, and a formal declaration before the full Ashcroft Board of Trustees aboard this vessel on the night of the succession date. Constance looked up. Which is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Celine said. We would have had more time, but identifying you took, I know how long it took. She set her fork down again, this time deliberately. What's the security situation? Dante answered that one. We have 18 personnel on board, all vetted. The yacht's communications are encrypted. We filed a false destination with maritime authorities. As far as anyone tracking us knows, we're headed to Cabo. A pause. But Celine, the moment Victor knows you're alive and claiming the estate, he'll try to finish what he started 27 years ago. Yes. She nodded. She'd known that since the moment Dante had knelt on the dock. She'd known it before that, had felt it in her bones for weeks, that low-grade pressure of something approaching that she couldn't name and couldn't see. Then we have 3 weeks to stay alive and get me in front of that board, she said. That's the plan. What's the part you're not telling me? Dante looked at Constance. Constance looked at her papers. There's a board member, Constance said slowly. Theodore Graves. He's been on the Ashcroft board for 19 years. He's also, we discovered last month, been receiving payments from a Cayman account we've traced back to Meridian Pacific. Victor has a man on our own board. Yes. Which means Victor will know about the succession ceremony. Which means, Dante said, that the ceremony itself will be the most dangerous moment. He'll know exactly where you'll be, and he'll know exactly when. Celine looked at the portrait of her mother above the fireplace. That slightly left of center gaze. Those folded hands. Then we use it, she said. Use what? The ceremony. He knows I'll be there, which means he'll commit to a plan. He'll move resources, personnel. He'll expose himself. She turned back to the room. We let him think he knows what's coming. Dante was quiet for a long moment. That's your father's thinking. I grew up watching him. Your father is dead. I know that, she said, quietly, without heat. I know. The room settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the sound of water against the hull and the distant mechanical hum of the engines. One of the 5 assembled staff members shifted his weight. Another refreshed something on her tablet. They were trying to be professional about the fact that they were in a room where a woman had just learned that the man her father trusted most had probably ordered her parents killed. It was a lot to be professional about. Celine stood up from the table. I'd like to see my cabin. Of course, Dante said. Marcus will show you. I know the layout, she said. I grew up on this boat. She walked out. She found the forward corridor, took the stairs down 1 level, moved through the passage with the automatic certainty of muscle memory from a childhood she'd spent 27 years trying not to think about. The cabin at the end of the corridor. Her cabin, the one with the porthole that looked forward over the bow. She found the door, put her hand on the handle. Stopped. Pressed her forehead against the door. Her chest was doing something complicated. She gave it 30 seconds, counted them out. Let the pressure build and crest and recede, the way it always did when she gave it time instead of fighting it. Then she opened the door. The cabin was exactly as she remembered. Same narrow bunk. Same built-in desk with the lamp clamped to its edge. Same shelf where she'd kept the 14 books she'd read and reread during the months they'd spent at sea when she was a child. When her father had business at various ports, and her mother would tutor her on deck, and the world had been, for those brief stretches, entirely manageable. The books were still on the shelf. Someone had kept this cabin exactly as she'd left it. She sat down on the bunk, pressed her palms flat on her thighs, breathed. Her phone, the burner she'd been using for the past 3 years, the one registered to the identity that was now effectively burned, had 12 notifications. She'd turned the sound off when they'd boarded. She looked at them now, scrolling without urgency, because urgency required caring about something, and she was currently deploying all her caring capacity on not falling apart in a room that smelled exactly like it had when she was 12. 9 of them were news alerts. Her name, her real name, was already on 3 major outlets. Someone at the marina had gotten a clear shot of Dante kneeling, and someone else had done the facial recognition, and now Celine Ashcroft was trending on platforms she'd spent 7 years deliberately avoiding. The 10th notification was from an unknown number. No area code she recognized. I don't know what's happening, but I need you to be safe. She stared at that for a long time. Adrian. She knew his phrasing, knew the particular staccato of how he expressed concern. Always reluctant, always late, always genuine enough to be painful. She put the phone face down on the bunk. Then she picked it up again and typed, "Stop contacting this number," sent it, put the phone away. Then she lay back on the bunk, stared at the ceiling, and began working through what she actually knew about Victor Harlow. The real version, not the version she'd watched Adrian perform loyalty toward for 3 years. Victor had been 57 when she'd known him as her father's associate. He'd be 84 now, if the math held. But the Victor she remembered had been one of those men whose age seemed more like a setting they'd chosen than something that was happening to them. Controlled, precise, a face that showed exactly the emotion that would be useful to show in any given moment. He'd come to the house twice that she could remember. Both times her mother had watched him with a particular stillness, not discomfort exactly, but the watchfulness of someone cataloging a threat. She hadn't understood it at the time. She was starting to think her mother had understood Victor better than her father ever had. The knock at her door was 3 quick, even taps. Dante's signal. She remembered that too, from childhood. Some things you didn't forget no matter how hard you tried. "Come in," she said. He opened the door but didn't enter. Stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and his face doing its default thing, which was controlled neutrality over something more complicated. "We have a problem," he said. She sat up. "Already?" "There's a boat. It's been matching our course and speed since we left the marina. Private vessel, transponder registered to a charter company in San Diego that doesn't appear to have any other boats." He paused. "We've been followed for approximately 90 minutes. Victor moves fast." "Victor had people in position before we arrived." His jaw tightened slightly. "Which means he knew we were coming before we came, which means someone on your team told him." She stood up. "Or someone on the board reached out the moment they got word." "Graves." "Probably." She picked up her jacket from where she'd dropped it on the desk. "What's our plan?" "We're changing course. There's a private port we use in Monterey. We can outrun the tail, dock privately, transfer you to a ground vehicle, and get you to a secure location while we—" "No." He stopped. "Running puts us reactive," she said. "If we're reactive for 3 weeks, we'll make a mistake. We won't make it to the ceremony." She pulled on the jacket. "Who is the captain of that following boat? Do we have an ID?" "Working on it." "Work faster. And get me a line to our man in the FBI. We still have one, I assume?" "We have 2. "Good. I want to know everything they have on Meridian Pacific Group, every transaction, every shell, every name on any document that touches that company." She moved toward the door. He stepped back to let her pass, which she noticed. That automatic stepping back, the way he'd always made space for her without making a production of it. "There's something else," he said, to her back. She turned. "Your husband called my direct line 20 minutes ago." She felt something move through her chest that she identified, cataloged, and filed away. "What did he say?" "He said, and I'm quoting, 'I think Victor is going to do something. I need to talk to Celine.' And then he said, 'Tell her I didn't know about the trust.'" She held Dante's gaze for a long moment. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know." "Do I believe him?" "That," Dante said carefully, "is not a question I'm qualified to answer." She turned back toward the corridor. "Don't call him back yet." "What should I tell him if he calls again?" She was already walking. "Nothing. Tell him nothing and see what he does with it." She was halfway to the stairs when the yacht's PA system clicked and the captain's voice came through, flat and professional, the way pilots announce turbulence. "All hands. We have an inbound contact from the port side. Vessel is not responding to hail. Recommend all passengers relocate to interior positions." Celine stopped walking. She turned back toward Dante, who was already moving, already reaching for the radio at his belt, already shifting into the mode she'd watched him shift into when she was 12 years old and the world had come apart around her. "How many are on that boat?" she said. "We don't know." "Best guess." He looked at her. His eyes were the same as she remembered, the particular gray of certain winter mornings, calm in a way that was not complacency, but discipline. "Enough to be a serious problem," he said. She nodded once. Then she walked to the window of the corridor and looked out at the water. The following vessel was closer now, but close enough to see clearly. It was a fast motor yacht, 60 feet maybe, moving at a speed that was designed to look casual and wasn't. 3 figures visible on deck. All of them moving with the deliberate, unhurried efficiency of people who had done this before and weren't in any hurry because they were confident about how it ended. She felt the old cold thing settle into her chest. Not fear exactly, not calm exactly. The thing between them, the state she'd trained herself into during years of childhood preparation that she'd always hoped she'd never need and had apparently never fully stopped needing. She turned away from the window. "Dante," she said, "tell me we have weapons on this boat." He looked at her for just a beat too long. "Celine, tell me." "Yes," he said, "we have weapons." "Good." She started walking again toward the interior, toward the operations room she knew was 2 levels down and midship. Then let's stop pretending any of us thought this was going to be simple. The motor yacht was still closing, and somewhere in a high-rise office in San Francisco, Victor Harlow was looking at a phone screen and waiting for confirmation of something he'd been planning for 27 years. And Adrian Mercer was standing at a window watching the water and trying to understand the shape of the mistake he'd made. And Celine Ashcroft was moving through the corridors of the ship where she'd learned to read and learned to fight, and learned that the difference between surviving and not surviving was usually just which one of you decided first that you weren't going to stop. She had decided. She had decided before she ever signed those papers this morning, though she hadn't known it yet. She'd decided in the lobby, with her suitcase. She'd decided on the dock, watching Dante kneel, letting herself be found, stepping onto the tender and crossing the water toward everything she'd been running from. You couldn't go back from a decision like that. The yacht shuddered as the captain pushed the engines harder. The pursuing vessel matched the change almost immediately. Too immediately, the response too calibrated, the distance between them holding steady, with a precision that confirmed what Dante hadn't said out loud yet. These weren't amateurs, and whatever they'd been sent to do tonight, Celine Ashcroft was no longer the woman they were expecting to find. The operations room was 2 levels down and smelled like recycled air and old coffee, which was somehow exactly right. Celine pushed through the door ahead of Dante and took in the room in one sweep. 6 monitors, 2 operators, a tactical display on the center screen showing their vessel in blue and the pursuing contact in red. The distance between them rendered in cold digital numbers that were not decreasing fast enough to be comfortable. A third operator was on a headset in the corner, speaking in low, rapid sentences to someone she couldn't identify. 2 of Dante's security personnel stood against the far wall, armed, watching the screens with the specific quality of attention that meant they were ready to do something about what they were seeing. "Talk to me," Celine said to the room. The nearest operator, young, female, the kind of competent that didn't need to announce itself, swiveled in her chair. "Pursuing vessel has reduced speed. They're holding at 400 meters. Why'd they slow down?" "Unknown. Could be tactical. Maintaining distance while they assess. Could be they're waiting for a signal." "From who?" The operator glanced at Dante. He nodded once. She looked back at Celine. "We intercepted a short-burst encrypted transmission from the pursuing vessel approximately 6 minutes ago. We're still breaking the encryption, but we've identified the transmission endpoint." A pause that went 2 seconds too long. "Where?" Celine said. "San Francisco. Residential address in Pacific Heights. The property is registered to a trust, but the beneficial owner—" The operator pulled up a record on her secondary screen. "Constance Albright." The name dropped into the room like something heavy falling from a height. Celine did not move. She was aware of Dante, to her left, going very still. She was aware of the hum of the engines and the soft electronic pulse of the tracking display, and someone's breathing that was slightly too controlled to be accidental. "Where's Constance now?" Celine said. "Main salon," Dante said, already reaching for his radio. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "If she knows we've identified the transmission, she'll destroy whatever else she has on her. Walk me through what we know before we move." Celine's voice was level in a way that required active maintenance. "How long has she been in contact with whoever's on that boat?" "We can't confirm duration from a single intercept. Best estimate based on transmission protocols." The operator worked for a moment. "The encryption pattern matches a system we've seen associated with Meridian Pacific Group communications. If she's using their protocol, she's been embedded long enough to have received their communication infrastructure. That's not something you get from one conversation." "How long?" Celine said again, quietly. "Years," the operator said. "Probably years." Celine pressed her back teeth together, released them, thought about Constance Albright standing in the salon with the water glass she hadn't drunk from, telling her the terms of the trust with the practiced fluency of someone who had reviewed those terms 1,000 times. Thought about how completely she'd received every word as authoritative, as loyal, as safe. Thought about the fact that Constance had been the one to structure her disappearance 27 years ago, had known her new name, had known every identity she'd used since, had known potentially where she was at every point in the last 27 years. "She's the one who told them about the pharmacy," Celine said. Dante's voice was very quiet. "We don't know. She's the one who told them I'd surfaced. She's the one who told them the location, the timeline, how we were going to move." Something was tightening in Celine's chest that wasn't grief and wasn't rage, but was some third thing that lived between them. She controlled the entire disappearance, every new document, every new city. She could have told them where I was at any point. "Then why wait?" Dante said. "Why not?" "Because of the trust." Celine turned to look at the tactical display. The red contact was still holding at 400 meters. She needed me alive until the succession date, dead before it. She needed me to come in, go through the verification process, and then die on the night of the ceremony before I could formally declare. She paused. She's a secondary beneficiary too, isn't she? The operator was already running the search. Celine didn't need to see the result. Constance Albright, the operator said, reading from her screen. Named as tertiary beneficiary in an amendment to the Ashcroft Trust filed 18 years ago. Contingent distribution value, current asset estimate. A pause. Approximately $3.7 billion. $3.7 billion. For 18 years. That was what patience looked like when it had enough money attached to it. She kept me hidden, Celine said. She protected me for 27 years. Yes, Dante said. And she was planning to kill me for the last 18 of them. He didn't answer. The answer was already in the room. Celine turned to the operator. Is the pursuing vessel armed? We have to assume yes. What are our defensive options? Dante stepped forward. Celine, what are our options, Dante? He looked at her for a moment. That gray winter morning expression. Then he looked at the two armed personnel against the wall. We can increase speed. We have a knot advantage. We can extend the gap. We can alter course for international waters where our response options are broader. We have 2 riflemen on the upper deck. And Constance is in the main salon with full access to our course, our communications, our personnel rotations. Yes. All right. Celine moved toward the door. Bring her here. I'll handle it. She stopped with her hand on the door frame, turned back. Get your 2 riflemen positioned. If that boat moves inside 300 meters, I want to know about it before it happens. She went back up through the corridor alone, which she suspected Dante didn't like. She could feel him not following her, the specific quality of someone choosing not to intervene when their instinct was to intervene, because they understood that intervening would be wrong. She appreciated the restraint. She also didn't care much about anything except the next 5 minutes. The main salon door was ajar. She pushed it open. Constance was standing at the window. Not sitting, standing, which meant she'd been there long enough to give up on performing comfort. The water glass was on the table where she'd left it. The folder was closed in her hands. Outside the window, the water was darkening toward evening, and the California coast was a pale line to the east, already distant. She turned when Celine came in. Her face went through something complicated and then settled into composed. I was wondering when someone would come for me. Celine closed the door behind her, didn't move toward the center of the room, kept the distance between them exactly as it was. How long? She said. Constance set the folder on the table. It was a deliberate movement, slow, careful, the movement of someone who understood that quick gestures in the current context would be misread. The amendment was filed 18 years ago, Constance said. But Victor came to me 23 years ago, 5 years after your disappearance. What did he offer? What he offered was irrelevant. What he showed me was what mattered. She turned back to the window. He showed me documentation that your father had known about the assassination attempt 3 weeks before it happened, that your father had received a warning from a source inside the organization that eventually moved against him, and he had chosen not to act on it. Celine didn't say anything. He chose not to act on it because acting on it would have required him to expose a business arrangement he wasn't willing to expose. A financial relationship with certain people in certain industries that would have destroyed the Ashcroft reputation. Constance's voice was flat. Not cruel. Worse than cruel. Matter of fact. Your mother died because your father valued his business reputation more than the warning he'd received. That's Victor's version, Celine said. I've had 23 years to verify it independently. I have. She paused. Your father was not the man I served for 30 years. The man I served was a version he was willing to show me. The real man made a calculation, and your mother paid for it. Celine let the silence run for a moment. In her peripheral vision, the window was darkening, the water moving, the horizon doing the indifferent thing that horizons always do. You could have walked away, she said, 23 years ago, when Victor came to you. You could have walked away from the trust, from the estate, from all of it. Yes, Constance said simply. Why didn't you? For the first time, something shifted in the older woman's composure. Not much. A tightening around the eyes. A breath held a beat too long. Because someone needed to stay close to Victor, she said. Someone who knew what he was planning, and because... She stopped. Because you were angry, Celine said. Constance looked at her. You were angry at my father. You'd served him for 30 years and he'd lied to you, and Victor gave you a way to profit from the anger. Celine kept her voice very level. That's the part that's hard to forgive. Not that you were angry, that you decided the anger was worth $3.7 billion. The silence in the room was different now, heavier. The transmission to the pursuing vessel, Celine said. What did you tell them? A beat of pause. That you'd been identified, that you were aboard and unprotected. Unprotected. I told them Dante's security had been compromised, that it was a good time to move. Was that true? No, Constance said. I needed them to act tonight. If they wait for the ceremony, Dante will have 3 weeks to harden the security and the operation becomes much more complex. Victor's people work best when they move fast. I gave them false confidence. Celine stared at her. You told them I was unprotected, so they'd move now rather than waiting. Yes. Knowing that Dante's people are prepared. Knowing that Dante's people are prepared. Celine took one slow breath. You're helping us. Constance's expression didn't change. I'm managing the situation. Those are not the same thing. No, they're not. She picked up the water glass finally, drank from it, set it down. I've been managing Victor Harlow for 23 years, feeding him enough to maintain his confidence in me, protecting you enough to keep you alive, preparing for the moment when you'd come in and the succession could actually proceed. She paused. I am not on your side, Celine. I want to be clear about that. What I want is for the Ashcroft estate to transfer cleanly, for Victor to be neutralized, and for my consultation on the resulting legal restructuring to represent an appropriate compensation for 23 years of very difficult work. You want a fee? I want recognition of service. You were going to let them kill me. I was going to make sure that didn't happen and earn significant compensation for that service. There is a difference. Something moved across Constance's face that might, in a different light, have been shame. The amendment was insurance. Victor insisted I be named as beneficiary or he would have known I wasn't committed. I accepted the terms and then I made sure you stayed alive long enough to make them irrelevant. Celine looked at this woman who had built her false life, who had chosen her new names, who had been the architect of everything she'd become in the years since 12. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was a profound and exhausted understanding of how people went wrong without going entirely wrong, how the motivations that destroyed things were often not simple evil, but complicated, long-corroded compromises that had seemed like the only available option at the time. It didn't make it forgivable. It made it human, which was, in some ways, worse. The people on that boat, Celine said. How many? 8. All former military. Victor uses the same contractor he's used for 12 years, a man named Cross. British SAS background, efficient, expensive, absolutely loyal to whoever's paying him. What are Cross's orders? Board the vessel. Eliminate Dante's security team. Take you alive for transport to a location Victor has prepared. Kill everyone else. The everyone else landed the way it was designed to land. Where's the location? Celine said. I don't know. Victor doesn't share that with me. My role was surveillance and misdirection, not logistics. Celine turned and walked to the door, opened it. Marcus, Dante's man, the one with the scar through his eyebrow, was standing in the corridor with the posture of someone who had been positioned there for the last 10 minutes and was trying to look like he'd just arrived. She stays in this room, Celine told him. Don't hurt her. Don't let her use any device. Don't let her near a window. He nodded. She went back down to the operations room. The tactical display had updated. The red contact was moving again, the 400-meter gap beginning carefully to close. Dante looked at her when she came in. 8, she said. Former military, contractor named Cross. They think we're unprepared. They're coming to board. When? Soon. Constance pushed them to move tonight. Dante processed this in the way he processed most things, without visible reaction, but with a quality of focus that was almost tactile. She told them we're compromised. Yes, to flush them out tonight rather than waiting for the ceremony. Why would she do that? Because she wants the succession to go forward, she wants Victor neutralized, and she wants to be paid for 23 years of managing the situation. In that order. She looked at the screen. She's not our friend. She's also not wrong that forcing his hand tonight, on our terms, in a controlled situation, is better than waiting 3 weeks while he positions people around the ceremony. Our terms, Dante said carefully. They think we're compromised. Which means they'll approach expecting minimal resistance. Which means we have a tactical window that closes the moment they realize Constance misled them. The operator looked up from her screen. Contact is at 280 meters and closing. Celine felt the cold thing settle fully into her chest. Not the anxious cold, the working cold. The cold she'd felt once before, 27 years ago in a cargo hold, listening to sounds above her and making herself breathe. Tell your riflemen to hold, she said to Dante. I don't want them to know we've seen them coming until they're committed. Celine. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not quite alarm, not quite caution. Something between them. I need you to stay below deck. I need to be where I can see what's happening. That is not a debate I'm willing to have right now. Then don't have it. She held his gaze. I know this boat. I know every exit point, every vulnerable approach, every place a boarding team would want to come over the rail. You have 18 personnel, and I have 27 years of anger and significantly more relevant knowledge than you're giving me credit for. She paused. Where do you want me? He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that was doing several things at once. Assessing, reluctant, arriving at a conclusion he hadn't wanted to arrive at. Upper deck port side, he said. There's a storage locker behind the secondary helm station. Access panel on the inside opens to a sight line over the whole port approach. She nodded. Celine. She stopped. If Cross is as good as Constance says, then we need to be better. She said it without drama, just the fact of it. That's all. She was almost to the door when the PA clicked again, and this time the captain's voice had a different quality. Not the controlled alarm of before, but something flatter, which was somehow worse. All personnel. Pursuing vessel has cut its running lights. Celine stopped walking. Repeat. Contact is running dark. We have visual of a second vessel bearing 270, also running dark. Second contact appears to be, we are designating second contact as a pause, the kind of pause that went 3 seconds too long. Second contact is moving to intercept from the western approach. We have 2 vessels, both running dark, both converging. 2 boats, not one. Constance had known about one, which meant either she hadn't known about the second, or she had and chosen not to mention it, and either way, the tactical situation had just become substantially different from the one they'd been preparing for. 16 operatives at minimum, converging from 2 directions. The pursuing vessel from the east, drawing their attention and their defensive positioning. The second vessel from the west, coming in from the blind side while they watched the approach they'd been meant to see. Celine turned back to the operations room. Dante was already on his radio, repositioning personnel, his voice low and rapid. The 2 operators were both working now, fingers moving with the compressed efficiency of people operating at the edge of their capacity. On the central screen, 2 red contacts converged on the blue marker that was their position, and the distance between them and both threats was decreasing at a rate that had just become the most important number in the world. She looked at the screen. She looked at Dante's profile as he managed the radio traffic. She thought about Constance in the salon and Victor Harlow in San Francisco and Adrian at his window and her mother's portrait above the fireplace and the way the cargo hold had smelled when she was 12. Diesel and salt and something metallic she'd understood even then was blood. She thought about the decision she'd made when she'd stepped onto the tender at the dock. The decision to stop running. The decision that meant there was no version of the next few hours in which she was a protected person, a hidden person, a person being kept safe by other people's choices. She crossed to the wall panel opposite the door and opened it. Behind it was a secured rack. She'd known it would be there because her father had kept the same configuration on this vessel her entire childhood, and some things, apparently, didn't change. She selected a weapon with the care of someone who had learned to do this a long time ago and had never quite stopped knowing how. Checked the load, chambered, set the safety, and held it at her side. Dante had turned from his radio and was watching her. He didn't say anything. She looked at him. Second vessel changes the positioning. You need your people split, half covering the port approach where they expect resistance, half covering the western rail where they think they're coming in clean. That's what I'd do, and if Cross is as good as Constance says, that's what he'll do. She moved to the door. Upper deck, port side. You said there was a sight line. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he spoke into his radio. All teams, revised positioning. And he began giving orders that matched exactly what she'd said, because he was, whatever else he was, someone who put the correct answer ahead of his preferences. She went up through the vessel, moving fast and quiet through corridors she knew in her feet and her hands, climbing through the interior darkness of the boat where she'd grown up, ascending toward the upper deck and the sight line and the two dark vessels converging on them through the Pacific night. Behind her, the yacht's engines surged as the captain pushed for speed, a last-second attempt to extend the window, to buy another minute or two. Ahead of her, through the hull, she could hear the ocean and the wind and nothing else yet. But nothing else yet wasn't nothing else forever, and somewhere in the dark water to the west, a team of professionals was closing on the port rail without their lights, and without any expectation that the woman they'd come to collect was already moving toward them. The storage locker was where Dante had said. The access panel was where she remembered. She settled into position behind the secondary helm console, found her sight line over the port approach, and made herself breathe the way she'd been taught. Slow, even, from the bottom of the lungs, the kind of breathing that didn't shake. The western approach was dark. The ocean was dark. The only lights were the distant California coast and the cold scatter of the first evening stars. She waited. And then, at the edge of the water, she saw the white line of a bow wake, running silent and fast and directly toward them, and the world she'd spent 27 years hiding from arrived all at once. The first man came over the western rail at the exact moment Celine had calculated he would. She didn't fire. Not yet. She watched him clear the railing and drop to the deck in a crouch, weapon up, moving immediately left to create space for the man behind him. Professional interval. Practice sequence. These were people who had done this enough times that their bodies did it without instruction. Second man over. Third. Fourth. She counted them because counting was the only thing between her and the part of her that wanted to act before she had enough information to act correctly. Her father had told her that once, not in a fatherly way, not sitting at a kitchen table with warm light and good intentions, but in a corridor very much like the corridors of this boat, his hand on her shoulder, his voice stripped of everything except the thing he needed her to know. You always wait until you have enough. Acting on not enough gets you killed. She had been 11 years old. It had not been a normal childhood. Fourth man, fifth. They were fanning out across the deck in pairs, moving toward the interior access points. The main salon entrance, the stairwell hatch, the secondary ladder down to the operations level. Two of them peeled off toward the bow. One stayed at the rail, covering the approach, watching the water behind them. 6 total from the western vessel, which meant the eastern approach, the one Dante's people were covering, the one Constance had told them about, was either a feint carrying 2 operatives or a genuine assault carrying the same. She pressed her earpiece. Dante. Western rail, 6 confirmed. 2 heading bowward. 2 toward main salon, 1 at the stairwell hatch, 1 covering the rail. His voice came back immediately, low and close. Eastern vessel just made contact. 2 operatives, port bow. They're not pushing, they're holding position. Decoys. The eastern boat was 2 men and a lot of noise designed to fix Dante's attention and his people, while the real assault came over the undefended western rail. Cross had split the threat to split the response, and it had almost worked. Almost. Eastern decoys are contained, Dante said. Repositioning 2 teams to your level now. Give me 60 seconds before you move, she said. A pause. Why? Because if your people come through those interior hatches before I've neutralized the man at the stairwell access, they'll come up into his sight line and we'll lose someone. She watched the operative at the hatch through the access panel. He was good, still, patient, covering the approach with the relaxed focus of someone who didn't expect trouble because he'd been told there wouldn't be any. 60 seconds. Dante said. 50. She was already moving. She came out of the storage locker low and fast, staying below the sight line of the man at the rail, using the console housing as cover. The deck was wet from spray, and her shoes found the traction, and she moved along the port side in the dark, closing the distance to the stairwell hatch in a wide arc that kept her out of the peripheral vision of the two men heading for the salon entrance. The operative at the hatch had his back 3/4 to her. He was watching the hatch. He was not watching the deck behind him because he'd been told the deck was clear, and he believed it because Constance had told Victor, who had told Cross, who had told his team that the security on this vessel was compromised. She covered the last 8 feet in 2 steps and brought the butt of the weapon down at the base of his skull with the precise, unhappy efficiency of someone who had been taught exactly where to hit and how hard. He went down without a sound. She caught his weight before it could hit the deck. Not perfectly, one knee struck metal and she winced at the sound, and lowered him the rest of the way. She pressed her earpiece. Stairwell hatch is clear. Move. She heard Dante's teams before she saw them. The muffled sounds of people moving fast through interior spaces. The specific rhythm of a coordinated advance. From the main salon direction came 3 sharp sounds in rapid sequence, too controlled to be panic, too quick to be anything except trained people doing their jobs. Then the deck went loud. The 2 men heading for the salon entrance had made contact with Dante's team coming the other way, and what followed was fast and ugly and close quarters in the way that close quarters always was. Less like a fight and more like a collision, bodies and decision-making compressed into a space where the advantage went to whoever committed first. She moved toward it, staying low, and came around the salon entrance in time to see one of Dante's men put the second operative against the deck and hold him there with the focused brutality of someone who had been very frightened and was expressing that through his hands. She did a fast count. Both of Cross's men were down. Both of Dante's men were standing, one of them with a gash above his ear that was bleeding freely, and that he appeared to be ignoring. 2, she said to Dante in her earpiece. Salon approach clear. Bow team is down, he came back, and we have 1 unaccounted for from the western vessel. She had counted 6. 2 at the bow, 2 at the salon, 1 at the hatch. 1 unaccounted for. She turned back toward the stern. The unaccounted for operative was standing at the entrance to the aft stairwell, with a phone pressed to his ear and his weapon in his other hand, and he was looking directly at her with the expression of a man who has just understood that the situation he was briefed on and the situation he is actually in are 2 completely different things. He said something into the phone, something short. Then he lowered it. She raised her weapon. Don't, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. He was older than the others, 50, maybe, with the particular weathering of someone who had spent significant portions of their life outdoors in bad conditions. Cross, she thought. This was Cross himself. He lowered his weapon, slowly, with the visible deliberateness of a professional who understands that the gesture needs to be readable. He set it on the deck, straightened up. You're not what we were told, he said. His accent was British, faded from years of working elsewhere. No, she said, I'm not. Constance told Victor you had no close protection background, no tactical training. Constance told Victor a lot of things. He looked at her with something that was almost appreciation and was definitely assessment. The old woman played us. She played everyone. It's her primary skill. She kept her weapon level. Who else knows you're here, besides Victor? That's not a question I'll answer. I know. I asked it anyway. She heard Dante's footsteps on the deck behind her and didn't turn around. Take him below. I want him separated from the others. Dante came up beside her. He looked at Cross on the deck. He looked at Celine. His expression was doing several things she didn't have time to catalog. You have a cut on your forearm, he said. She looked down. She did. She hadn't felt it happen. Somewhere in the movement from the storage locker to the hatch, she'd caught an edge on something. The metal housing of a deck fitting, probably, and opened a line along her left forearm that was bleeding into her sleeve with patient indifference. Later, she said. It needs later, Dante. He pressed his jaw together, nodded to 2 of his people, who moved to take Cross by the arms and walk him toward the interior. Cross went without resisting. At the entrance, he turned back and looked at Celine one more time. Victor isn't going to stop, he said. Whatever you think you've accomplished tonight, he's not the kind of man who stops. I know, she said. Neither am I. They took him below. She stood on the stern deck while the adrenaline did what adrenaline always did on the back end of a thing, turned the edges of everything sharp and cold and slightly unreal. The ocean was the same. The stars were the same. The California coast was a dark line she could barely see from here. She pressed her palm flat against the railing. Wet steel, cold, real. Dante appeared beside her and, without asking, took her left arm by the wrist and examined the cut with a small flashlight and the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had been doing this kind of inventory for a long time. He produced a field dressing from somewhere on his person and applied it with minimal ceremony. "We have 8 in custody," he said, working as he talked. 2 of ours with injuries, neither serious. Eastern vessel is detained alongside. 2 men, as expected, neither willing to talk yet. He secured the dressing. "Cross will talk. He's a professional. Professionals calculate, and the calculation here is obvious." "Victor will already know the operation failed," she said. "Yes." "How fast can he reposition?" "Fast. He's been planning this for 27 years. He has contingencies." Dante let go of her wrist. "The ceremony is in 19 days. We cannot maintain this level of operational security for 19 days aboard a vessel that 3 separate parties now know the location of." She thought about that. The ocean moved under them. Somewhere below, in the operations room, the tactical display was probably showing the 2 dark vessels sitting quiet in the water, their threat neutralized, their personnel in custody, the whole carefully constructed assault reduced to an inventory problem. "Victor needs me alive until the ceremony," she said slowly. "Dead before the succession is declared. Which means between now and the ceremony, his operational constraint is the same as ours. No lethal force until the timing is right. Unless he decides the risk of the ceremony outweighs the benefit of waiting and moves to eliminate you outside that window. In which case the trust dissolves, the estate goes to the secondary beneficiaries, and he gets his share regardless." She nodded. "He'll wait. But he'll make the ceremony itself the kill zone." "Which is what you said this afternoon. Use the ceremony." "Yes." She turned from the railing and looked at him. "But we need something Victor doesn't know we have. We need something that changes the board completely, not just delays it." She paused. "I need to talk to Adrian." The silence that followed had a particular texture. "Celine, he called your line and told you he thought Victor was going to do something. He said he didn't know about the trust." She held his gaze. "If that's true, if he genuinely didn't know, then Victor used him for 3 years, used his company as a vehicle for the Meridian Pacific structure without his knowledge." She paused. "Victor is his mentor. Victor is the man he built everything with. That kind of betrayal, when Adrian finally understands the full scope of it, could go several ways," Dante said carefully. "Yes, it could." She didn't look away. "But Adrian is many things. Arrogant, oblivious, careless with people he should have valued. He is not patient, and he is not, whatever his failings, the kind of man who lets someone use him without consequence." She paused. "Victor made a mistake putting Meridian Pacific in Adrian's name. He thought it made Adrian complicit. It actually made Adrian a target with a personal grievance, and personal grievances make people do things that calculated self-interest wouldn't." Dante was quiet for a moment. The boat moved under them. "I'll arrange a secure line," he said. She nodded, started toward the interior. "Celine." His voice stopped her. She turned. He was still at the railing, the ocean behind him, his face doing the complicated things she'd never been able to fully read. "Your father would be—" He stopped, started again. "You did well tonight." She looked at him for a moment, at the scar through his eyebrow and the gray at his temples, and the weight that 27 years of keeping a promise had left in the lines of his face. "Don't," she said, gently. "Don't tell me what he would think. He doesn't get to have an opinion about tonight." Dante held her gaze, nodded once. She went inside. The secure line took 11 minutes to establish. Celine sat in the communications room 1 level below the operations center and listened to the encrypted connection cycle through its handshake protocols and thought about what she was going to say to a man she had spent 3 years learning not to need. The room was small, barely enough space for the chair and the equipment rack and the operator who'd set the connection up and then left without being asked, because people on this vessel had apparently developed a talent for reading the room. The line clicked open. Adrian said, "Celine." Just that. Her name. The way he said it told her he'd been sitting next to the phone. "You called Dante's line," she said. "I didn't know how else to reach you. Your number—" "I know." She'd burned the number herself 30 minutes after his text. "What do you know about Meridian Pacific Group?" A pause. 3 seconds. long enough to mean something. Victor's fund has a position in it, he said carefully. He brought it to me about 4 years ago as a co-investment vehicle. Real estate adjacent, port infrastructure, shipping logistics. I put in capital through a holding structure he recommended. What holding structure? Another pause. He said it was Standard Asset Protection, a Delaware entity. I didn't pay close attention to the name. Victor handled the filing. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Adrian, the Delaware entity. What was it called? She heard him moving. The sound of a chair, papers, the particular rustling of a man who kept physical files because he didn't entirely trust digital ones. That habit had always irritated her. She felt something about it now that wasn't irritation. Meridian Pacific Group, he said, very quietly. The holding structure was Meridian Pacific Group. You are the beneficial owner of Meridian Pacific Group. A breath. Victor said it was a pass-through, that the beneficial ownership was the fund, that my name was just, your name is on a trust document, Adrian, my family's trust, as a secondary beneficiary, contingent on my death. The silence on the line had a quality she'd never heard from him before. Not the silence of a man composing himself. The silence of a man understanding something so large it was taking up all the available space. I didn't know, he said. I know. Celine, I know you didn't know. That's why I'm calling. She pressed her palm flat on the table. Victor used your name to create a financial instrument that gives him legal cover when I'm dead. You're the face on the structure. You take the scrutiny. He takes the money through whatever mechanism he's built, one layer deeper. She paused. The divorce wasn't your idea. It wasn't a question, but he answered it anyway. Victor suggested it, Adrian said. 8 months ago. He said I'd outgrown the marriage, that you were holding me back, that a man at my level needed... He stopped. She could hear him breathing. He said a lot of things. I thought they were his opinion. They were his operational requirements. The breathing on the line changed, got harder. She recognized that, the specific quality of Adrian Mercer's anger when it was real rather than performed. She'd seen it twice in 3 years, both times directed at people who had deceived him professionally. She had never seen it directed at Victor. What do you need from me? He said. His voice had flattened out completely. The flatness of a man who has decided something. Documentation. Everything you have on the Meridian Pacific structure. The original filing, the co-investment terms, every communication from Victor that touched that vehicle. I need the paper trail that shows you were misled, not complicit. For what purpose? The succession ceremony is in 19 days. When I stand in front of the Ashcroft board and declare, Victor is going to move to block it on the grounds that the secondary beneficiary structure supersedes my claim. My lawyers will counter. His lawyers will counter. It becomes a legal fight we might not win inside the timeline, because he's had 23 years to build his legal position and we've had 3 weeks. She paused. But if we can demonstrate active fraud in the construction of the Meridian Pacific vehicle, if we can show the beneficial ownership was misrepresented in the trust filing, then the secondary beneficiary designation is void. His entire legal position collapses. You need me to prove he used me. I need you to prove he defrauded you, which he did, which means you already have the evidence. You just need to find it and get it to Constance Albright's replacement before the ceremony. Who's replacing Constance? Someone I trust more, which currently means almost anyone. She heard something shift in the connection, a faint compression artifact that could mean anything or nothing. Adrian, how fast can you get the documentation together? I can have everything by tomorrow morning. I've been pulling files since this afternoon. A pause. I started pulling files before you called. I thought... He stopped again. I thought if something was wrong, I should know what I had. She didn't say anything for a moment. There's something else, he said. Victor called me 2 hours ago. He said you'd surfaced, that there were people trying to exploit you, that he was trying to help manage the situation. He asked me to come to his office tonight. Her hand tightened on the edge of the table. Did you go? I'm not there yet. I was supposed to leave 20 minutes ago. His voice was very level. I haven't left yet. Don't go. I know that. Adrian, I know, Celine, I'm not going. A breath. I'm sorry. I know I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. She thought about what Constance had said, about her father's calculations, about the long corroded chain of compromises that led from a warning not acted on to a 12-year-old girl in a cargo hold. She thought about Adrian at his desk not looking up from his phone when she'd signed the papers, and the fact that she'd signed them without making him look up because she had decided that demanding to be seen by someone who didn't want to see you was a form of indignity she was done performing. "Get me the documentation," she said. "Get somewhere safe tonight and stay there." She ended the call. She sat in the small room for 30 seconds. Then she stood up and went back to work. The 19 days that followed were the most controlled and the most exhausting of her life. They moved the yacht twice. Once to a private anchorage outside Monterey, once to open water off the coast, where maritime jurisdiction became complicated and Victor's reach, while long, had to work harder. Dante restructured the security rotations every 48 hours. New personnel came in by tender, vetted through a process she was not fully briefed on, and chose not to press about. Cross, in custody in the lower deck, began talking on day 3. Not because he was broken, but because Dante had made him a calculation he found favorable. And Cross, as Dante had predicted, was ultimately a professional. Cross gave them 3 things: the name of Victor's logistics coordinator, a man named Park, who managed the contractor network from an office in Seattle; the location of a secondary asset Victor maintained outside his known property portfolio, a compound in the Cascade foothills that didn't appear on any public record; and the date Victor had been given for the succession ceremony. The correct date, which meant Theodore Graves on the Ashcroft board was feeding Victor real information in real time. Dante moved on Graves on day 7. Not physically. A package of documentation delivered to Graves's home address at 6 in the morning, containing evidence of his Meridian Pacific payments, alongside a single sheet of paper that said, in plain language, that his continued cooperation with Victor Harlow would result in this documentation reaching federal prosecutors before the end of the business day, and that his immediate resignation from the Ashcroft board and full cooperation with Celine's legal team would result in the documentation remaining private. Graves resigned by 9:15. He was on the phone with Constance Albright's replacement by 10. Victor didn't know Graves was gone until day 9, when he tried to confirm the ceremony logistics through their established channel and got no response. By then, Celine's legal team had filed the preliminary documentation in 3 jurisdictions, and Adrian's evidence package had been received, authenticated, and incorporated into the fraud filing that was currently sitting on a federal judge's desk in San Francisco. On day 11, Victor Harlow became aware that the legal ground was moving under him. On day 12, he made his next move. She was on the upper deck at 6 in the morning working through the board presentation with the replacement counsel, a sharp-featured woman named Diana Rice, who had the quality of intelligence that expressed itself as impatience with anything that wasn't the point, when Dante appeared at the top of the stairs. His face told her before he spoke. "Adrian," she said. "He's alive," Dante said immediately. "He's in a hospital in San Francisco. Victor's people took him last night from the hotel he'd been staying at. He was found this morning. Someone called it in anonymously." He paused. "He's stable. Broken ribs, concussion, soft tissue. They were sending a message, not eliminating him." She set down her notes. She felt the cold thing move through her, and this time it wasn't the working cold. This was something else. Something she hadn't given herself permission to feel for 3 years, and was apparently not capable of not feeling, which was deeply inconvenient. "The message being," she said, "the message being that he has people close enough to Adrian to reach him, and that the documentation Adrian sent us is compromised because Victor now knows exactly what it contains." Dante paused. "And the message being that he can reach anyone you care about, at any time." Diana Rice had stopped working and was watching Celine with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to speak. Celine looked at the ocean. "The documentation is already filed. Victor knowing what's in it doesn't change what's in it." "No. But it tells us he's past the point of patience. He's not waiting for the ceremony to make his move. He's accelerating. Because the legal position is weakening. Yes. Every day we file more documentation, the weaker his secondary beneficiary claim becomes. He needs the ceremony to happen before the fraud filing reaches the judge's ruling stage. He needs me—" She stopped, corrected it. He needs the succession to be contested on his terms rather than resolved before we get there. So the ceremony, Diana said, speaking for the first time, is still the pivot point. He needs it to happen on schedule so he can move against you during it. And you need it to happen on schedule so the succession transfers before his legal team can file a counter-injunction. Both sides need the same night, Celine said. Yes, Dante said, which is not a comfortable position to be in. It's the position we're in. She picked up her notes. I need to see Adrian. Celine, I need to see him, not because... She stopped, reorganized. Because he's the primary witness in the fraud filing, and I need to know what he told them. What Victor's people asked him about, what he said, what he might have said under duress that we need to account for. She held Dante's gaze. That's why I need to see him. Dante looked at her for one moment with the expression of a man who knew perfectly well that was not the only reason, and had decided that saying so would not improve the situation. I'll arrange transport, he said. The hospital was a private facility north of the city, the kind of place that had valet parking and artwork in the corridors and staff who had been trained to treat the presence of a security detail as unremarkable. Adrian was in a room on the 4th floor. Dante stayed outside. She went in alone. He looked worse than she'd expected and better than she'd feared, which was how bad things usually presented themselves. The bruising around his left eye had gone deep purple and yellow at the edges. His right arm was immobilized. He was sitting up in bed with the television off, and the particular expression of a man who has had a very bad night and has spent the morning going back over every decision that led to it. He looked at her when she came in. Something moved across his face that she didn't try to categorize. You came, he said. Don't make it into something. I'm not. He shifted, winced, settled. They asked about the documentation, Victor's people. They wanted to know what I'd sent, who had it, whether there were copies. He paused. I told them I'd emailed it to my personal attorney and that my attorney had instructions to release it publicly if I didn't check in every 12 hours. Was that true? No, but they didn't know that. They left. He looked at his immobilized arm. I think they also wanted me to call you and tell you to stand down. Did they say that? Not in those words, but they left a phone on the nightstand, a burner, with one number programmed in. He nodded toward the bedside table. She looked. The phone was there. She picked it up, looked at the number. Didn't recognize it, but recognized the area code. Pacific Heights, Victor's residential neighborhood. He wants you to call him, Adrian said. He wants to negotiate. He wants me afraid. I know. Adrian looked at her directly. Are you? She thought about the honest answer to that, about the cargo hold in the cold, and the things she'd been carrying for 27 years that she'd never been able to fully put down. Yes, she said. I'm afraid and I'm going to do it anyway. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Something in his face shifted. He looked at her the way she'd wanted him to look at her for 3 years and hadn't been able to ask for, and she felt the familiar complicated thing move through her chest and filed it away, because there was no version of the next 6 days in which it was useful. The documentation, she said. Is there anything you told them that we need to account for? No, I didn't tell them anything real. He paused. Celine, I need you to know. Everything I had, every piece of paper that touched Meridian Pacific, I sent it to your team. All of it. I didn't protect anything. I know. I could have. There are things in there that aren't. There are things that reflect badly on me. Business decisions I made with Victor's guidance that I should have questioned. I sent them anyway. She looked at him. I know, Adrian. I received everything. I just need you to know I didn't hold anything back. I know. She set the burner phone down on the table. Rest. Don't use that phone. She moved toward the door. What are you going to do? He said. She stopped with her hand on the door frame. The same position she'd been in on the yacht when Dante had told her about the second vessel. The same position she kept finding herself in, on the threshold of the next thing, looking back at the last one. I'm going to finish it, she said. The ceremony was in 7 days. The next 72 hours were preparation. The kind of preparation that didn't look like anything from the outside, but was everything on the inside. Celine went through the succession protocol with Diana 3 times until she knew it the way she knew the corridors of the yacht, in her feet and her hands, without having to think. She went through the board composition with Dante, 10 members remaining after Graves's resignation, 8 of them verified clean, 2 of them uncertain enough to require monitoring. She went through the security architecture for the ceremony night with Dante's logistics team, standing in the main salon with a floor plan on the table and talking through approach vectors and response times with the direct, unhurried precision that came from having moved through danger enough times to stop flinching at the details. On day 4 before the ceremony, the federal judge in San Francisco issued a preliminary ruling on the fraud filing. Not a final decision, a preliminary ruling that acknowledged sufficient evidence to warrant emergency review of the Meridian Pacific beneficial ownership designation. Victor's legal team filed a counter-motion within the hour. Diana's team filed a response within the hour after that. The legal machinery was grinding, and grinding fast, and the question was only whether it would grind to a conclusion before or after the succession ceremony. On day 2 before the ceremony, Celine stood on the bow of the yacht at 4 in the morning and looked at the water and made a decision that she didn't tell Dante about. She picked up the burner phone from where she'd kept it in her jacket pocket for 6 days. She dialed the single number programmed into it. It rang twice. Victor Harlow said, "I wondered if you'd call." His voice was exactly as she remembered, 84 years old and controlled in the way of a machine that had been engineered rather than aged. Precise, without temperature. "I'm calling," she said. "You've made quite a lot of noise these past weeks. Your father would have been proud, I expect. He also had a tendency to confuse activity with progress." "Tell me something about my father that's true," she said. "Not the warning story, something true." A pause. "He was the most gifted businessman I ever knew, and the most catastrophically blind to the people around him." Another pause. "He never saw you, Celine. He saw a dynasty. He loved the dynasty. You were part of the inventory." She let that land. Let it sit. It hurt in the way that true things hurt, worse than lies because you couldn't argue with them. "He asked Dante to protect me," she said. "He asked Dante to protect his heir," Victor said. "There is a difference. One your Mr. Vescari has clearly failed to internalize, given the way he looks at you." "I'm calling to tell you something," she said. "I assumed." "The ceremony happens in 2 days. I will be there. I will stand in front of that board, and I will declare. And the succession will transfer, and your beneficial claim will be voided by the fraud ruling that is currently in front of a federal judge who has already indicated which way she's leaning." She paused. "You can bring every contractor, every mercenary, every resource you've accumulated in 27 years, and I will still be standing at the end of it." Victor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the controlled quality was still there, but underneath it, something else moved, something she'd never heard from him in childhood, something she hadn't expected to hear now. "You sound like her," he said. "Who?" "Your mother." A pause. "She called me once, 3 weeks before the attempt. She told me she knew what was coming. She asked me to stop it." He paused. "I told her I didn't know what she was talking about." The deck moved under Celine's feet. The ocean moved under the deck. Everything was moving except the center of her, which had gone absolutely still. "She knew," Celine said. "Margaret knew everything. She always did." His voice had changed, barely, just at the edges. "She was the one I should have been afraid of. Not your father." A pause. "I wasn't, which was my error." "And me?" The pause this time was longer. "You," Victor said, "are her daughter, which is the thing I failed to adequately account for." A sound that might have been a breath or might have been something else. "I'll see you at the ceremony, Celine." He ended the call. She stood on the bow in the dark and felt the night air on her face and thought about her mother holding perfectly still for 3 hours in a painter's studio while a 9-year-old watched from the corner. Thought about the way Margaret Ashcroft had watched Victor Harlow walk into her house with the stillness of someone cataloging a threat. She'd known. She had known, and she had called him, and she had not been able to stop it. Celine pressed the burner phone between both palms. Then she set it on the bow railing and walked away from it and went back inside to finish preparing for the last 2 days. Behind her, the phone sat on the railing with the Pacific wind moving around it and the water moving beneath it and the darkness holding everything in the patient, indifferent way that darkness always did, waiting for the light to come back and reveal whatever was left standing. The night of the succession ceremony arrived the way consequential nights always do, quietly, without announcement, the sky over the Pacific going from gray to black in the same indifferent way it had done every evening for 1 billion years before this one and would do for 1 billion after. Celine stood in the cabin that had been hers since childhood and looked at herself in the narrow mirror mounted above the desk. She had chosen the clothes carefully, not armor, not performance, but the particular deliberateness of a woman who understood that what you wore into the most important room of your life was a decision, not an accident. Dark charcoal, clean lines, the kind of understated that costs more than ornament. Her mother's watch on her left wrist, the one Constance had kept in a sealed envelope for 27 years and delivered without comment on the morning of day one aboard the yacht. She hadn't thanked Constance for it. She wasn't sure thanks was the right instrument for that particular exchange. The cut on her forearm had closed into a thin dark line beneath the bandage. She left the bandage off tonight. There was something honest about the line being visible. She heard the knock, 3 even taps, Dante's signal, and said, "Come in," without turning from the mirror. He opened the door and stood in the threshold, which was where he always stood when he had something to say that he wasn't sure how to say. I was dressed for the ceremony too, dark suit, no tie, the particular formality of a man who wore authority in his bearing rather than his clothing. "Board is assembled," he said. "All 8 verified members present. Diana is in the salon with the documentation. The legal team in San Francisco is standing by for the federal line." He paused. "No unusual activity on the perimeter. All approach vectors are clean." "That won't last," she said. "No," he agreed. "Probably not." She turned from the mirror. "How many of your people on board tonight?" 22, plus 4 Coast Guard vessels at standby distance, called in as a maritime security exercise, which legally they are. Victor will have someone inside that perimeter. I've assumed that since day one. Who's the most likely Vector? The catering staff we brought on for the board dinner. 3 of them are new. Background checked, but background checks can be manufactured. He paused. We've positioned people in the galley. If anything moves, we'll see it. She nodded. Picked up the small folder from the desk. The succession declaration. Diana's work, legally precise and personally brutal in the way that legal documents about inheritance always manage to be. She held it in her left hand, the hand with the watch. Dante, she said, if something goes wrong tonight, nothing will go wrong. If something goes wrong tonight, she said again, calmly, the documentation is filed, the fraud ruling is pending, and Adrian has copies of everything in 3 separate locations. The succession can be pursued posthumously through the trust mechanism. Diana knows the procedure. He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing the complicated thing again. I'm not accepting that as a contingency, he said. I'm not asking you to accept it. I'm telling you it exists. She moved toward the door. He stepped back to let her pass, and she stopped beside him, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the particular texture of 27 years in his face. Your oath to my father was about keeping me alive. I'm releasing you from it. He went very still. You've been carrying it for 27 years, she said. Whatever happens tonight, whatever comes after, you carried it. It's done. She paused. What you do next is yours. He didn't speak for a moment. The corridor hummed with the low sound of the engines and the ocean and everything held in check. What I do next, he said very quietly, is the same thing I've been doing. He held her gaze. Because I'm not doing it for the oath anymore. She held his gaze, nodded once, and walked toward the main salon. The board of trustees had assembled around the long table in the formal dining salon, a room she'd eaten breakfast in as a child, sitting at the corner seat that got the morning light, reading whatever book she'd brought down from her cabin while her mother complained cheerfully about her table manners. The room looked nothing like that memory tonight. The table was set with documents rather than food. 8 people sat in the kind of careful stillness that meant they understood what they were part of. Diana Rice stood at the head of the table with the particular authority of a woman who had prepared for this room for 2 weeks and was entirely ready for it. She looked at Celine when she entered and gave a single nod. Celine took her place at the foot of the table, opposite Diana, the length of the table and 27 years between them. The board of the Ashcroft Consortium is convened, Diana said. for the purpose of verifying and receiving the succession declaration of Celine Margaret Ashcroft, sole surviving heir of the Ashcroft estate, pursuant to the trust instrument established in 1987 and its subsequent amendments. She looked around the table. Each trustee has received and reviewed the verification documentation, biometric confirmation, DNA authentication completed and certified by an independent laboratory, and full legal identity verification establishing the declared heir as the person recorded in the original trust. A pause. Are there objections to the verification findings? Silence around the table. 8 people looking at their documents, or at Celine, or at the middle distance of people who are doing a serious thing and feel the weight of it. No objections recorded, Diana said. Miss Ashcroft, you may present your declaration. Celine opened the folder. She'd read it enough times that she didn't need to look at the page. The words were in her, settled there by repetition into something she could access without searching. But she looked at the page anyway, because there was something in the act of looking at written words as you spoke them that grounded the words in the real, made them a thing rather than an air. She began to read. Her voice was steady. The room was very quiet. She was 3 sentences from the end when the lights went out. Not a flicker. A clean cut, everything at once, the salon dropping into complete darkness except for the emergency LED strips at floor level that cast the room in the flat, colorless light of a place that has had its warmth removed. Several people at the table inhaled sharply. One of the trustees said something low and controlled. Diana's voice came through the dark. Stay seated. Everyone stay seated. Celine had already closed the folder. Into the darkness, her earpiece clicked. Dante. Generator feed cut at the main panel. Deliberate. We have movement on the starboard side. Multiple contacts coming over the rail. A half-second pause. Celine, stay in the salon. She was already moving toward the door. The corridor outside the salon was emergency lit in the same flat color, and she moved through it fast, knowing the layout without needing to see it, her hand trailing the wall not for guidance but for information, feeling the vibration of footsteps through the hull, the particular frequency of people moving quickly on the deck above. She took the starboard stairwell up, 2 at a time, and came out onto the deck into a night that was all wind and darkness and the smell of the ocean and the immediate, specific sounds of a fight already in progress. Victor had sent more than contractors this time. There were 12 of them. She counted what she could see in the dark, men moving across the deck with the focused organization of a military unit rather than a hired team. Dante's people were engaged at 3 separate points, and the quality of resistance she was hearing was higher than what Cross's team had offered 2 weeks ago. These people were better. Victor had understood the first operation had underestimated what he was dealing with. He'd adjusted. She moved along the interior wall of the deck toward the secondary helm position and had covered half the distance when a figure stepped out of the shadow of the equipment housing directly in front of her, and she pulled up hard to avoid collision. The figure said, "Don't." It was Dante's voice. She exhaled. "I told you to stay in the salon," he said. "You did," she agreed. He looked at her for 1 second in the emergency lighting and then let it go because there wasn't time to do anything else. "Starboard bow is clear. The main push is midship and aft. They're trying to reach the salon to disrupt the declaration before it's complete." "How many do you need to hold midship?" "Everyone I have." "Then you don't have anyone to cover the aft stairwell descent." She was already reading the geometry of it. The 2 approach vectors converging on the salon, the gaps in coverage that a 12-person team hitting simultaneously would create. If 2 of them get below decks through the aft stair, they reach the salon from underneath before your midship team can respond. "I know." "Who's covering the aft stair?" A half-second that told her. "Nobody," she said. "Celine." She was already moving. The aft stairwell was at the stern, accessed through a narrow passage between the equipment housings that was lightless in the emergency configuration. She moved through it by memory and came out at the top of the stair in time to hear footsteps below her. 2 sets, ascending, close, moving with the quiet confidence of people who believed this access was undefended. They were right about undefended. They were wrong about empty. She pressed herself against the wall at the top of the stair and waited. Let them come to her, because the geometry of a narrow stair gave the top position an advantage that negated the numerical one. The first figure came up through the hatch, and she was already moving. She took him by the weapon arm, leveraged the momentum of his own ascent against him, and put him against the wall hard enough that the impact did most of the work. He went down. The second figure was faster, came up with the weapon already transitioning, and she was inside the arc of it before it completed, close enough that the weapon was useless. Working the space the way she'd been taught in a different life in a different body that was apparently still available to her when she needed it. It was ugly, and it hurt, and she took a strike across the left side that sent white light across her vision, and she answered it with something she felt in her shoulder for the next 3 days. And at the end of the 30 seconds, the second figure was on the deck of the stairwell, and she was breathing in the controlled, careful way of someone managing pain, and she stood at the top of the hatch and said into her earpiece, "Aft stairwell clear, 2 down." Dante's voice came back rough with something. "Copy. Midship is contained. We have 2 of theirs in custody. Rest are—" A burst of sound, movement, withdrawing to the port side. "Victor's people are retreating?" "Not retreating. Repositioning." A pause. "There's a boat at the stern. Private helicopter inbound. We're tracking it. Came off the radar about 2 minutes ago. Flying low." "Victor," she said. "He's coming himself." Another pause. "Celine, he's coming." She stood at the top of the aft stairwell with her shoulder burning and her breath coming in the controlled, careful rhythm, and thought about an 84-year-old man who had spent 27 years building a structure designed to make him untouchable, watching that structure crack apart one filing at a time, and deciding that the only remaining move was to come himself. She understood that, in the way she understood most things about Victor Harlow, not with sympathy, but with the cold clarity of someone who had studied an opponent long enough to think in their patterns. He wasn't coming to negotiate. He wasn't coming to witness. He was coming because he had decided that if the succession was going to be stopped, it required him to be the one who stopped it, and that was the decision of a man who had run out of other options. She went back down through the passage and came out on the main deck in time to see the helicopter, a dark executive bird, running without navigation lights, descending toward the helipad at the stern with the deliberate precision of a pilot who had done this approach before. Victor's people who had been midship were repositioning toward the stern, creating a perimeter around the landing zone, which told her the retreat had been tactical, buying time for the helicopter to arrive. Dante materialized beside her, 4 of his people behind him. "We can stop the landing," he said. "Call the Coast Guard in now. The helicopter has to—" "No," she said. He looked at her. "If we stop the landing, he goes back to San Francisco, and the legal fight continues for months, and people keep getting hurt trying to hold a position." She watched the helicopter complete its descent. "This ends tonight. With him, on this boat, in front of the board that is assembled in that salon." She turned to look at Dante. "Bring him to the salon. He's not going to walk willingly into a room with you and your legal team." "No," she agreed. "He's going to walk onto this deck believing he has enough people positioned to take control of the situation. And when he realizes he doesn't, he'll do what he's always done." She paused. "He'll talk. Because talking is how Victor Harlow has survived for 84 years. The helicopter touched down. The rotors slowed. The door opened. Victor Harlow descended the steps with the unhurried certainty of a man arriving at a meeting he'd scheduled, and she thought, he is 84 years old, and he moves like that, and she understood something new about what she'd been up against, which was not just a plan or a conspiracy, but a quality of will that had sustained itself for nearly a century and did not intend to stop tonight. He was wearing a dark overcoat despite the mild air. His hair was white and precisely cut. His face, in the emergency lighting that was the only illumination on the deck, had the quality she remembered from childhood. Controlled temperature, every expression a decision. He looked at Dante's people positioned around the helipad. He looked at the 2 members of his own team who had stepped out with him and were now reading the geometry of the situation with expressions that indicated they understood it was not what they'd expected. He looked at Celine. He said, "You were supposed to be in the salon." "I was," she said. "I finished the declaration before the lights went out. Diana witnessed it. 7 of the 8 trustees witnessed it. The 8th had stepped out to use the restroom and came back in time to see the last 2 sentences." She paused. "It's done, Victor." Something moved across his face. Not the thing she'd expected. Not anger. Not calculation. Something that looked in the flat emergency light almost like exhaustion. "The federal ruling won't come tonight," he said. "My legal team has filed 3 counter motions. The fraud case will take months. The fraud case is a civil matter, she said. The succession is complete. The trust has transferred. Whatever your lawyers argue about Meridian Pacific, they're arguing it in the context of a succession that has already been legally declared and recorded by 8 trustees. She kept her voice level. You don't have a mechanism anymore, Victor. The mechanism required my death before the declaration. I'm standing here. The declaration is made. He looked at her for a long moment. His 2 operatives exchanged a glance that she read clearly. They were recalculating. Professional recalculation. The kind that leads, in her experience, to professionals deciding that the situation has changed enough to change their obligations. Your people can leave, she said to the operatives. Not unkindly, just the fact of it. The operation is concluded. One of them looked at Victor. Victor didn't give them an instruction either way. They looked at each other, and then, with the practiced neutrality of people who had been in this position before, they walked toward the rail. Victor watched them go. When they were over the rail and in the water heading for their extraction, he looked back at Celine. The deck was quiet now. Dante's people standing at intervals. The helicopter sitting dark behind Victor. The ocean doing its constant, indifferent work around all of them. Your mother called me, Victor said. I know, you told me. I didn't tell you everything. He looked at the deck for a moment. The posture of an old man carrying something, not performing it, actually carrying it, which was different enough to be visible. She didn't just tell me she knew, she told me I could stop it. He paused. She told me she knew what I was, what I'd been doing alongside your father for 30 years, and she told me she was willing to keep that private, not for his sake, for mine. He looked up. She was offering me a way to stop. Celine held herself very still. I told her it was too late, he said. The people involved, the organizations I'd made commitments to. I told her it was beyond me to stop. He paused. That was true, and it was also a lie. The truth and the lie lived in the same sentence. I've been living in that sentence for 27 years. And my mother died for it, Celine said. Yes. And my father. Yes. And 27 years of my life. He looked at her. Something in his face that she hadn't seen before and wouldn't see again. Something raw, underneath the controlled temperature, underneath the 84 years of managed expression. Something that had been locked in that sentence for 27 years and had run out of room. Yes, he said. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had taken everything from her and spent decades engineering the conditions for taking more. And she felt the thing she'd been carrying since the cargo hold moved through her, not dissolving, not resolving into something clean and forgivable, but shifting, settling differently. The way a thing you've carried for a long time settles when you set it down somewhere permanent. She wasn't going to forgive him. She wasn't going to hate him either. Both of those required more ongoing attention than she was willing to give. Dante, she said without turning, call the Coast Guard. Victor looked at her. He nodded once, slowly, the single nod of a man accepting an arithmetic he'd been avoiding. He straightened, set his hands at his sides. Your mother, he said quietly, before Dante could speak into his radio. She was not afraid. When she called, she was... He paused, finding the word. She was clear. I've never understood how she managed that. Celine looked at him. She was always clear, she said. She just didn't always have someone worth being clear to. The Coast Guard arrived in 11 minutes. Victor Harlow was taken from the deck of the Ashcroft yacht in handcuffs, in the flat, colorless light of the emergency system, by people who had been waiting 2 weeks for the call that would give them jurisdiction to act. He didn't resist. He walked between them with the upright posture of a man who had decided, in the last available moment, to meet what was coming rather than run from it. She watched him go over the rail into the Coast Guard tender and thought about her mother on the phone, 27 years ago, offering a way out to a man who couldn't take it, and about the portrait above the fireplace in the main salon. That slightly left gaze, those folded hands, the expression that was not happiness, but resolution. She understood it differently now. It wasn't the expression of a woman who had made her peace. It was the expression of a woman who had looked at everything clearly and continued anyway. The deck emptied slowly. Dante's people went to work on the cleanup. The practical, unglamorous aftermath of a night that had involved violence and darkness, and the careful management of consequences that didn't end when the immediate danger did. She stood at the railing and watched the Coast Guard tender move away across the water with its lights running red and white against the black. She heard footsteps behind her, not Dante's measured stride, slower, more careful. She turned. Adrian was standing at the top of the aft stairwell, which meant he'd come up from below, which meant he'd been on the boat, which she had explicitly told him not to be. He looked like he'd been traveling, the specific dishevelment of someone who had moved quickly over a long distance without stopping to manage their appearance. His arm was still immobilized. The bruising around his eye had faded to something yellowish that made him look, in this light, like a man who had been through something and hadn't entirely processed it yet. "I told you to stay in San Francisco," she said. "I know. You have broken ribs." "3," he said. "The doctor said 3. And you're on my boat." "Your boat?" he said quietly. "Yes." He came to the railing, stood beside her, not close, not performing distance, just present in the way people are present when they've decided to stop managing how they present. He looked at the water where the Coast Guard tender had gone. "Is it over?" "The federal case will take months," she said. "His lawyers will file. We'll answer. There'll be depositions and counter motions, and approximately 400 more hours of Diana Rice being the sharpest person in any given room." She paused. "But yes, the thing that could have killed me is over." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have seen it, Victor, what he was doing." "You trusted someone you'd known for 30 years, she said. "That's not stupidity, it's just how trust works. You didn't trust me and you were right not to." She thought about that. About the 3 years in the apartment with the dark windows and the careful silences and the version of herself she'd been assembling. The version that didn't ask for things and didn't reveal things and wore her ordinariness like a second identity she'd grown so accustomed to she'd almost forgotten it was performance. "I wasn't right," she said. "I was protected. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her. She looked at the water. "I called you ordinary," he said. "At that dinner, I know you heard me. I know you meant it as something else. It doesn't matter what I meant. It was a stupid thing to say about someone I didn't understand." He paused. "It was a stupid thing to say about anyone." She didn't answer. The ocean moved. The wind came off the water cold and clean. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I know the shape of what I did. I know what it cost." He looked at his immobilized arm. "I just needed to be here tonight. I needed to know it ended." She looked at him. At the yellowish bruising and the careful way he held himself against the pain and the particular expression of a man who had spent 6 days understanding the true dimensions of his own failure and hadn't run from it. "It ended," she said. He nodded. They stood at the railing in the quiet that was left when everything else had finished, and she thought about the various shapes a life could take. The shapes she'd tried, the shapes that had been tried on her, the shape that might be possible now that she wasn't hiding inside any of them. She didn't know what came next with Adrian. She wasn't ready to know. Some distances couldn't be covered in a single night, and the honest thing was to say so rather than perform a resolution that hadn't been earned yet. "Go inside," she said. "You're cold and you shouldn't be standing on a deck with broken ribs." "You're also cold," he said. "I'm standing here on purpose." He looked at her for a moment. Then, without ceremony, he went back inside. She listened to his footsteps descend the stairwell, and then the deck was hers, and the night was hers, and the water was the same water it had always been. Dante appeared at her left. He'd changed his jacket. The previous one had sustained damage she hadn't asked about. He stood beside her at the railing with his hands in his pockets and looked at the horizon in the way of a man who had been looking at horizons his whole life and had developed a comfortable relationship with the fact that they never got any closer. "The board wants to reconvene in the morning," he said. "Formal ratification, photography, the administrative architecture of a transfer of this size." He paused. "Diana estimates 6 to 8 weeks before the operational transition is complete." "I know." The criminal syndicates Victor was financing, there are 4 of them, spread across 3 states. They've lost their primary funding source. They'll be destabilized but not eliminated. "That's the next thing," she said. "Yes. There's always a next thing." "There is," he agreed. She looked at the horizon. The sky to the east was doing something. Not light yet, not dawn, but the first almost imperceptible shift in the quality of darkness that came an hour before. She'd watched it from this deck as a child, The sky making its slow decision, the water going from black to something that wasn't quite black. And she'd always thought it was the most honest moment, the moment when the night stopped pretending to be permanent. "Your oath is discharged," she said to Dante. "You said that already. I'm saying it again, in the light, on the record." He looked at her. "And if I don't accept the discharge?" She almost smiled. "Then you're here because you want to be." "I'm here because I want to be," he said, simply, without performance. She nodded. They stood at the railing as the sky made its decision, the darkness conceding ground the way darkness always eventually did. Not surrendering, just acknowledging the arithmetic. Light had a way of accumulating. Below them, in the salon, the portrait of Margaret Ashcroft hung above the fireplace with its slightly left gaze and its folded hands and its expression that Celine now understood was not resolution but recognition, the face of a woman who had looked at the full complexity of her life and chosen not to look away from any of it. She had her mother's hands, she had her mother's clarity, and she was beginning to understand, something her mother hadn't had time to fully use, the rest of whatever came next, stretching forward from this deck, from this morning, from this particular shade of almost light that was turning the ocean from black to something that might, in another hour, be called blue. The succession was declared. The conspiracy was ended. The name she had buried for 27 years was hers again, clean and uncomplicated, attached to a woman who had proven she could protect it. She put both hands on the railing, felt the cold steel, felt the movement of the water through the hull, felt the wind come off the Pacific with its cargo of salt and distance and the accumulated cold of 10,000 miles of open water. She was not finished grieving. She knew that. The grief for her parents, for the years, for the versions of herself she'd had to discard to survive. That was work that didn't get done in a single night on a deck at dawn. That was slow, internal, unglamorous work that had no ceremony and no audience and no legal documentation to mark its completion. But she was here to do it. That was the difference. She was no longer hiding from it, or from herself, or from the name that was engraved on the trust document now bearing her signature. The horizon held. The sky continued its patient work. And Celine Ashcroft, chairwoman of the Ashcroft Consortium, sole heir of everything her parents had built and broken and tried to protect, stood at the railing of the ship where she'd grown up and watched the light come back and did not look away.